I can go ahead and admit everybody.
Yes.
Yes, please. Thank you, Kiminek.
All right, welcome everybody. We're just admitting people into the space. Folks who are waiting in the lobby. All right, I think everyone's here. If folks are in the lobby, we'll take care of it and continue to invite people into the space. Why don't we wait a couple more seconds? We have a lot of other people joining. All right, seems like just one more person in the lobby waiting to be let in. All right. All right, Alex, are you okay with me starting?
Absolutely. Go for it.
Okay, so hi everyone. Good afternoon and happy Friday. I'm very excited for all of us to be here to discuss the results of the latest climate survey. The DEI team is here with me, and I know that our research scientist staff are very honored and proud of the work that we've done in the last year. And I am so proud of our agency's engagement with this effort. We actually had more than 4,000 respondents for this year's climate survey, which is amazing because this is a voluntary survey. So 4,000 staff at our agency responding to this just shows how engaged and wonderful our employees are. So my best takeaway really, and I don't want to give too much away because we have, a lot of time with you today to go deep into the results. But my best takeaway from these results has been that the majority of staff feel that approaches and efforts for diversity, equity, inclusion do really make the experience better for OPWDD employees. And importantly, they give us a better ability to serve and provide day-to-day support to people with developmental disabilities and their families. And I think that that is very clear to me from the results of this survey. The DEI team is actually already in the process of working with various divisions and team leads to process some of these results and to continue supporting divisions' efforts towards diversity, equity, inclusion, supporting employee morale, and things like that. But today, we are looking forward to presenting to you the aggregate results. So those are the summary results for the more than 4,000 staff who took this survey. So I will be available. I'll do some highlights at the end. I'll be available for questions. But I think now I kind of just turn it over to the incredible DEI staff who have been so motivated to analyze and present this information.
Thank you so much, Hira, for that great introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. We are so excited that you chose to spend your lunch hour with us. My name is Mila Msungu, and I'll set the stage for the presentation by sharing our data management process, describing the survey process, who responded to the survey, and how the agency can use the climate survey results. My colleagues, Dr. Alexandria Keppel and Abby Adan, will present the survey findings. So as background information, the first OPWDD climate survey was conducted in 2022. The 2024 survey is our second annual climate survey. During today's presentation, we'll be sharing with you the results of the 2024 climate survey and whenever possible, providing comparisons to the 2022 climate survey. So I'll begin by sharing our data management process. I want to emphasize that we take precautions to protect the survey data. We limit who can access the data and keep the data anonymous. The survey system that we use only lets us see the randomly assigned numbers, and we do not see the names of the employees, neither do we know who responded to in whatever way they did. The data is also confidential. So data represents people, and we must protect and ensure that we act in the best interest of every employee. Ultimately, the climate survey response is dependent on trust. So towards this end, responses with less than 5% will not be presented to preserve confidentiality. So the overall plan for the 2024 climate survey, we have developed two kinds of reports. The aggregate report, this uses data from all OPWDD employees that responded to the survey. We also have division-specific reports that use data from employees that self-identified as belonging to a specific division. The Lunch and Learn aggregate report consists of data from the entire OPWDD responses of over 4,000 employees. The aggregate report has been presented to the following parties. We have presented to leadership, OPWDD leadership. We have presented to the DEI coordinating team. So today, we will be presenting the results to all OPWDD employees, the results from the aggregate data. So in addition to this, we have the disaggregated data, meaning group data specific to any of the groups that are interested. We are open to analyzing data for specific divisions and unions. The following divisions have expressed interest in their division-specific reports. We have the Division of Quality Improvement. We have the Division of Administration. We have SPS and State Operations. So the common question that we get asked a lot is, how do the 2024 results compare to the 2022 results? Although we see changes in responses, we try to be careful not to make such comparisons because the random samples for the 2 years are different, meaning that it's not the same people that responded in 2022. We are therefore unable to track growth and changes in opinions. Also, to be able to trend the data, we need a minimum of 3 data points. So far, we only have 2 data points. Therefore, we will point out the differences between the years, but take the information we present with a grain of salt, as these are not true comparisons. Lastly, we continuously review the survey questions for improvement. We have a couple of new question items for the 2024 survey. Let us now turn our attention to today's agenda. So during our presentation, we are going to cover the following topics: the purpose of the 2024 climate survey, the survey administration, the results of the responses by the 7 different domains or themes. We will share the data insights, and lastly, we'll open up the presentation for the Q&A. So in addition to this presentation, we have a full technical report. The technical report consists of all the 41 question items and the frequencies. The technical report has been uploaded on the OPWDD SharePoint site, so any of you can go there and access the report. Let's move along to slide number 3. What is an organizational climate survey? So the survey is used to collect data on employee perceptions of expected and rewarded behaviors. The survey is used to capture the prevailing atmosphere, the attitudes, and overall opinions of employees within an organization. The survey provides a picture of the agency's strengths and gaps. So moving to the next slide, the purpose of the survey. So the 2024 climate survey specifically was meant to solicit employee opinions on the following domains or themes. We have the work environment, we have the attitudes towards diversity, equity, inclusion, and agency culture, the sense of belonging, evaluation and promotions, and rewards and recognition, So the sixth domain is opportunities for career advancement, and this last one is motivation at work. And we want to emphasize that motivation at work is a new theme for the 2024 survey. So a key question is, how should the agency use these results? We can use these results as a tool, and a tool to get the overall picture of the agency, a tool to identify intervention strategies such as additional policies and trainings, a tool to measure the effectiveness of the programs that we have within the agency, and lastly, we can use the results to identify OPWDD strengths and opportunities for improvement. So the ultimate goal is to use the insights from the climate survey to create a more inclusive and equitable organizational culture, to align the systems, the processes, and leadership behaviors with the organization's strategic goals. So as a research team within the DEI office, we'll be looking for suggestions during this presentation on, number one, how to improve the 2025 climate survey, what questions to ask, how to improve the presentation of the results. So if divisions and unions are interested in breakout surveys, please let us know. So the next slide, we are going to present the survey administration. So we conducted the survey for a period of 6 weeks from April 8th to May the 31st of 2024. The employees were able to access the survey through an initial invitation email or through the QR code. The survey was anonymous and consisted of 41 questions and sub-items. So a couple of questions have been changed based on feedback we received last year. So a total of 4,146 employees responded to the survey. This is a 22% response rate compared to 10.7% response rate for last year. So as an agency, we are looking at ways to increase the response rates for the 2025 climate survey. Please use the chat feature on Teams to provide suggestions on how we can improve the response rates. So moving along to slide number 6, we are looking at the demographic information. So we did ask during the survey, how long have you worked for OPWDD? And a majority of the employees that responded have worked at OPWDD for a period of between 1 and 3 years. So this is a slight difference from last year. The majority of employees had indicated that they had worked between 3 to 6 years. So another question we asked during the survey is, do you have a disability as identified under the Americans with Disabilities Act? And this was a yes/no answer. So the people that responded yes were 246, representing 6% of the employees. The next question was, what is your current age? And the average age for OPWDD respondents was between 45 and 54 years. There was also a question on gender. What is your gender? And 73% of the respondents identified themselves as female, and 21% of the respondents identified themselves as male. So moving on to slide number 7. What is your ethnicity? So during the 2024 survey, 5% of the respondents said they were Hispanic or Latino. This is slightly higher than the 2022 survey, where the response rate was 3%. Moving on to slide number 8. What is your racial identity? So the chart presents the different breakdown of the different races. As we can see, 60% of the respondents self-identified as Caucasian or white. 18% of the respondents identified themselves as African American or Black. However, we have a concern on the chart. 15% of the respondents chose not to disclose. So we are really trying to improve that demographic information, because this information is important for leadership to be able to make data-driven decisions. So moving along to the next slide. Employee resource groups, ERGs, or also known as affinity groups. So we asked the respondents to identify their top 3 ERGs. And as we can see in the pie chart shown in the presentation, the topmost was professional or shared job titles. The second one was women in the workforce. And the last one is mental health and well-being advocacy. Moving along to the next slide. This is also a new question for the 2024 climate survey. So the question was, which additional topics for training would you like to see offered? And the question required people to select all that apply. So the 3 top trainings are, number 1, emotional intelligence. 1,819 responses wanted were in favor of emotional intelligence. The number 2 most requested training is microaggressions. And the last one is stereotyping. Closely followed by anti-racism and implicit bias training. So with that, I want to turn the presentation to my colleague, Abby, to take it from here. Please continue using the chat feature to make comments and ask questions. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Musungu. And certainly I'd like to use this next part of the presentation to really delve into some of the specific domains that were present in the survey itself. So for those of you who were gracious enough to give us your time this past spring to actually complete the survey, you may have noticed that as you went along through the survey, there were some questions towards the beginning that were dealing with, let's say, your demographics or your work site or your location in the state. But most of the questions in the survey actually dealt with these specific 7 domains. In total, there were 41 question items, and the way we sequenced things were, we wanted to know a little bit more about these 7 specific criteria, which are used pretty commonly in the Organizational Climate Survey and Organizational Behavior Evidence Base. So the first is work environment. The second was attitudes towards diversity, equity, inclusion, and agency culture. The third domain of interest was this concept of sense of belonging, and by proxy, also your sense of agency membership. So, where you see yourself specifically within OBWDD as the larger group identity. The fourth domain was evaluation and promotions. The fifth domain of interest was rewards and recognition. The sixth domain of interest was opportunities for career advancement. And finally, we had some questions also within the survey dealing with this concept of your motivation at work. So we definitely wanted to look at sort of how we could sequence the survey to encompass these 7 domains and also various sub-questions within each of those 7 criteria. Now what we'd like to do is tell you a little bit more about some of the highlights in the survey that were actually separate from those 7 domains, but dealt a little bit more specifically with diversity, equity, and inclusion as a whole, and just getting a sense of how that specific concept relates to the agency identity. So we wanted to know more about what employees thought in terms of whether or not employees agreed or not that employees from historically underrepresented groups, and this can be racial and ethnicity, underrepresented groups, and it be gender identity, and also disability status. Do we feel that employees from these historically underrepresented groups are treated fairly within the agency? So more than half of our employees in the 2024 survey, 57% agreed to some extent with that statement. We also wanted to know whether or not employees agreed to some extent with the statement of people of all lived experiences being respected and valued here in the agency. So we noted that more than half of employees agreed with those statements within the survey. And this was similar to what we found in the 2022 version of the survey, which was the first iteration of the survey in recent years. We also wanted to know whether or not employees agreed with the statement, in my agency, I can be successful as my authentic self. So 57% of the respondents agreed with that statement. This was also similar in terms of the 2022 survey. Almost half of employees who completed the survey agreed to some extent that senior leadership demonstrates a commitment to DEI. And this is actually a marked improvement from the 2022 version of the survey. And this is one of the things that we think is pretty notable because we did have an increase in the response rate in this 2024 survey, but if you look at the breakdown proportionally, there is still a proportional increase in terms of that improvement. And you can actually learn more about some of these differences in the reports as you explore the various data reports that we've prepared for you on the intranet. Also, we wanted to know whether or not employees agreed that they were satisfied to some extent with the level of diversity here within the agency. So about 48% of employees agreed with that statement. This was a similar percentage in the previous version of the survey. And we also wanted to break down the concept of whether or not employees believe that supporting DEI efforts improves the experience and interaction with those that they work with within a work site. So notably, 68% of respondents agreed that it impacts workplace interactions, whereas 69% of respondents agree to some extent that DEI has a notable improvement in terms of our experiences and interactions with those people that we seek to support and serve here within the agency. Now, when we look at the next domain, which was work environment, this is when we really get a sense of understanding more about the bidirectional relationships between our coworkers, colleagues, and also our direct supervisors. So just over a third of the respondents disagreed to some extent that the work environment is free from tensions related to an individual coworker. On the flip side of that, if you're thinking about group-related differences, less than half or 44% agree to some extent that the work environment is free from tensions related to group differences. So in terms of the difference of one-to-one relationships between one or two people, you're talking about a larger group in that second question that we asked. We also wanted to know whether or not employees agreed that recruitment and retention of historically underrepresented groups, whether that be ethnicity, gender identity, and also disability status, whether or not that's actually a priority here at the agency. So more than half of employees were actually pretty neutral. They neither disagreed nor agreed that recruitment and retention were a priority. And also, a majority of employees agree to some extent that they are comfortable reporting what they see here at the agency. And this is in terms of comfortable reporting incidents that may be unsavory or may be linked back to some type of negative interactions within the workplace. And 47% of employees have actually heard offhand remarks in the workplace. And this is actually similar to what we saw in the 2022 version of the survey. So the reason that this last point is important is this actually gets at the notion of whether we're seeing sort of microaggressions or instances of explicit and implicit bias in the workplace. So as we transition to the next slide, we're going to delve into a couple of the qualitative questions that we asked in the survey. And these would have been questions where we would have asked you to actually write out open-ended text to say, sort of what were your experiences with noticing or witnessing, overhearing insensitive or disparaging remarks in the workplace. So the first of those two questions was specifically asking, why did you refrain from filing a report of insensitive or disparaging remarks? The most common reason noted was bullying, retaliation, and fear of reprisal. So when we looked at this question, we conducted qualitative coding, and we actually used a deductive reasoning approach. We had saturation of responses, where we actually had more than one member of our team go through the responses of about 850 employees who shared their various narratives. And while bullying was the most common reason, we also had a number of responses that dealt with just the notion that there would be friction between colleagues if I were to file a report. There were a number of employees who had statements that were related to the category of nothing would happen. So what would be the point of reporting? It was also interesting that there were some employees that explicitly stated, I'm just simply unclear about the reporting process. And this is in the context of being unclear about the process, but also it does lead us to know that there does need to be more insight and education possibly, because right now the current forms of education would be through our annual SLIMS training. You also have information about the reporting process in the employee intranet. And also there is a section in the employee handbook that gets at the reporting process. But this could have been that some of these employees who answered that question may have been employees who are newer, who may be still unfamiliar with the process. Some of the less common themes in terms of the offhanded remarks in the workplace related to generic statements with an unclear perpetrator. So this would deal with people who had specific stories that they mentioned related to someone who may have made unsavory remarks, let's say at a water cooler or in an elevator, or maybe even in a hallway. So it may have been an unclear perpetrator. It could have even been overhearing something from someone who's not even in your department, but you just don't know who to pinpoint in terms of who said what. You may know when they said it, but you don't necessarily the who of it. And then there also were some really compelling stories that were shared about people who felt that the issue was resolved, so there was no need to report. And these were very amazing stories that we saw of people who would be considered bystanders and also allies who directly addressed the issue in real time. In some cases, people mentioned that they were already a supervisor and they specifically addressed the inappropriate nature of the remark. And because of that reason, there was no need to elevate the report to a formal process. So some of those stories that were given were just saying that I wanted to address it in real time so it wouldn't recur again. And then finally, a less common thing under maybe 10 of the responses were people who felt that the remarks were between staff with similar perceived identities or backgrounds. So this may have been perceived as colloquialisms or terms of endearment amongst people of a like background. So it was thought that it was no need to report those types of statements. So we also used a qualitative data analysis software to look at the 850 responses to just generate this cirrus cloud that you see on the right of your screen. And this is sort of linking the main sentiment of retaliation as a reason to be uncomfortable reporting what you see. And you link that, it shows the linkage between fear, tension, reprisal, comfort level, and also retribution. And in the lower part of your screen, what you're seeing is the frequency occurrences in terms of within our network directed graph. Retaliation, of course, is the highest count of the terms that we saw in the responses. And as you can see, retaliation is also linked with fear, comfort level, and also management and supervision. So we just wanted to give you a sense here of what emerged from the responses for those of you who gave us your examples of specific reasons why you would not report. And so another part of the domains of interest would have been the attitudes about agency culture. So specifically here, this is where we wanted to know a little bit more about whether or not employees actually feel that they're respected within the agency. So more than half, or 55% of employees, agreed to some extent that they feel respected. The majority of employees also agreed to some extent that employees of different backgrounds interact well with each other here in the agency. Also, the majority of employees agree to some extent that they are comfortable talking about their background and cultural experiences with their colleagues. Over half of the respondents, or 59%, agree to some extent that management demonstrates a commitment to meeting the needs of employees with disabilities. And also, about half of the respondents agree to some extent that OPWDD provides an environment that allows for a free and open exchange of ideas, opinions, and beliefs. And also, the majority of employees felt that they feel valued and respected by their colleagues here within the agency. Now, I will note that previously in the prior version of the survey, we actually did not ask about perceived value and respect from colleagues. We only asked about it in the 2022 survey within the context of management. So that's notable that now we were able to add another layer to the survey this time around to ask it bidirectionally, where 63% felt valued and respected by their colleagues. And also we asked it in terms of management as well. And also the majority of employees agreed to some extent that they are happy and satisfied within their job. So this is also notable because in the previous version of the survey, we only asked about whether a person agreed that they were happy with their job, and we didn't necessarily ask about satisfaction directly in that same linkage. So definitely we're very happy to see a number of you all responding within the chat, and we're very appreciative of the insights you're sharing so far. So now I will go ahead and transition over to my colleague, Dr. Capel.
Thank you for that, Abby. All right, continuing on with some more interesting data points, we're moving into our sense of belonging domain. So the first statistic that we're going to take a look at here actually shows that a majority of our employees, 69%, agreed to some extent that they feel they have things in common with others at OPWDD. This is almost doubled to the percent that we saw in 2022, which found 47% of respondents agreed with that same sentiment. More than half of respondents, 54% to be exact, agreed to some extent with the statement, "I feel like my colleagues understand who I really am." That is 54% for our 2024 survey, compared to a 39% of respondents who agreed with that same statement in 2022. Similar to what we saw in 2022, just under half of our employees, so we're seeing that 49% are agreeing to some extent that they experience a sense of belonging at OPWDD. We also see, when taking a look at work and personal life, 54% of our employees agreed that OPWDD enables a balance of their work and personal life, compared to 39% of employees who agreed to that in 2022. And for sense of belonging, we see that less than half, this is 41% of employees, agreed to some extent with the statement, "At OPWDD, I can voice a contrary opinion without fear of negative consequences." So one new scale that we added this year, in addition to our motivation at work, which we'll get to in just a bit. So we adapted this from the psychological sense of school membership scale. So rather than looking at school membership, we wanted to know, what is the sense of OPWDD membership? So this scale essentially assessed the extent to which OPWDD employees feel personally accepted, respected, included, and supported by others within the OPWDD organizational environment. So this scale is essentially going to assess belonging and feelings of rejection. This scale will also look at membership as it relates to two overarching categories. The first one being valued ability or valued competence. So in other words, I feel a sense of membership because others value my ability to do a task or to complete a task. The other aspect of membership we'll look at social acceptance. So I feel like a sense of OPWDD membership based on social acceptance or social factors. So we see, looking at valued competence or valued ability, majority, 59% of respondents, agreed to some extent people within the agency notice when I'm good at something. Exactly half of our employees agreed to some extent people within the agency value my opinions. So here we're seeing that constant theme of some sort of aspect of competence or ability. Less than half of our respondents, that's 45%, agreed to some extent that most employees within the agency are, quote, interested in what I have to say. A majority of our respondents, 71%, agreed to some extent that people within the agency notice I have a good work ethic. Additionally, 79% of our respondents agreed people within the agency know I can do good work. Our last bullet for valued ability is going to focus on compliments from a supervisor. So we see that majority of our respondents, 67%, agree to some extent with the statement, my supervisor gives me compliments when I do something good. Moving into social acceptance, we see that 62%, so a majority, agreed to some extent that they're treated with as much respect as their other colleagues. And an overwhelming 83% of our respondents agreed to some extent they have a good relationship with other colleagues at OPWDD. Just over half, 55% of respondents, agreed to some extent with the statement, I can really be myself at OPWDD. When presented with the statement, I feel proud of belonging to the OPWDD agency, 61%, so a majority, agreed to some extent they do feel proud of belonging to the agency. And our last bullet for social acceptance, as far as sense of OPWDD membership, 65% of our respondents agreed to some extent that other OPWDD colleagues like me the way that I am. Let's move into evaluations and promotions. So what did we find here? So we find that less than half of our respondents, 47%, agreed to some extent that employees from different backgrounds, and here we're referring to historically underrepresented groups, are encouraged to apply for higher positions at OPWDD. Similarly, we see that 40% agreed to some extent employees from those same groups are often promoted into higher positions at OPWDD. This is compared to 40% of respondents who agreed that employees of different backgrounds are encouraged to apply in 2022, and 31% who agreed that those same groups of employees are often promoted. We see that less than half of our employees, 48%, agreed to some extent that there is a career development path for all employees at OPWDD. This is almost a 10% increase from 2022, in which we saw 39% of our respondents agreed with the same sentiment. Also, for evaluations and promotions, we see that most employees, 64%, agree their job performance is evaluated fairly. Though we do see that, we also see that over a third, 35%, agreed with the statement, promotion decisions are fair at my agency. Let's move into rewards and recognitions. So for this first bullet, we actually are combining two different statements into one. So just over half of respondents, this is 51% and 54% respectively, agreed to some extent that they feel valued, that's our 51%, and respected, that's our 54%, by management at OPWDD. This question item was actually combined in 2022, and it found 41% of our respondents at that time agreed with this same sentiment. 58% of our respondents, so a majority, agreed to some extent that they get enough feedback about how well they're doing their job. This is a noted increase compared to 2022, which found that 43% of our respondents agreed with that same statement. This next bullet is actually going to share very similar findings from our 2022 survey. Almost 3/4 of employees, so exactly 74%, indicated that their job responsibilities have increased over the past year. And of course, the past year here referring to 2022 or 2023. And we also see that exactly 75% of employees agreed to some extent that their work makes a significant contribution to the success of OPWDD. These were similar to the 70% of respondents who agreed with the same statement in 2022. Taking a look at career advancement. So what did we find related to this domain? While 55% of respondents agreed there are good opportunities for training and professional development in their job, we see that less than half of employees, this is going to be 45%, agreed that new staff members receive effective training at OPWDD, and 46% who agreed that new staff members receive effective job orientations at OPWDD. We also see that just over half, 52% of our respondents agreed to some extent that their supervisor seems interested in their career development. Similarly, 69% of our respondents agreed they are supported by their supervisor. In 2022, these same data found that 39% of respondents agreed their supervisor seemed interested in their career development, and 53% of respondents agreed they felt supported. So we're seeing some increases there. Most employees, this is 60% of our respondents, agreed to some extent that there are good opportunities for advancement at OPWDD. This is noting an almost 10% increase from 2022, which showed 50% of respondents agreed with that same sentiment. And our last bullet under career advancement notes that 53% of our respondents agreed they were able to spend time this past year, referring to 2023, learning and growing professionally. And 60% agreed they had enough contact with more experienced OPWDD colleagues to learn from them. So the last domain that we're going to present here, so if you've made it this far, congrats. That's a lot of data for y'all to get on a Friday afternoon. So our motivation at work. This is a completely new questionnaire that we wanted to add this year that really assesses what's the reason or reasons that people work for OPWDD. So this is actually going to be an adapted motivation at work scale, and it's comprised of 4 subscales, but we're really only going to focus on 2. We're going to focus on intrinsic motivation, which is essentially doing something for its own sake or because it's enjoyable. For example, I do this job at OPWDD because I find it enjoyable. That's an example of intrinsic motivation. We're also going to look at a subset called external regulation or extrinsic motivation, which is essentially doing something in order to obtain rewards or to avoid punishments. So for example, I do this particular job because it provides me a paycheck. That would be an example of external regulation or extrinsic motivation. So what did we see with this domain? A majority of our employees, we're looking at 68%, agreed to some extent that they enjoy this work very much. Similarly, 51% agreed to some extent that they have fun doing their job. More than half of our respondents, 56%, agreed to some extent one reason they do this job is because it affords them a certain standard of living. While just over 1/3 of employees, 39%, disagreed they do this job because it allows them to, quote, make a lot of money. Just over 1/3 of our respondents, 37%, agreed to some extent that they do this job for the paycheck. while 51% of respondents agreed one reason they do this job is because it allows them to reach their life goals. 51% of our respondents noted that they do this job because it fulfills their career plans. Additionally, 65% of respondents, so a majority, agreed one reason they do this job is because it fits their personal values. Regarding doing this job because one's reputation depends on it, was not particularly noted as one reason why employees do this job, with 41% neither disagreeing nor agreeing reputation plays a role in their job motivation. So one of the things we're seeing for this particular domain is that we have a very high level of intrinsic motivation for why people work for OPWDD. So now let's talk about some data insights. We have presented you all with a lot of interesting data. And while these are not all the data insights that can be drawn from what we've presented, this does represent or highlight some aspects that we think might be relevant to note. So we're going to start with the agency demographic or the agency makeup. We see that our demographic makeup as an agency is predominantly female as well as predominantly white. We also see that almost a quarter of our respondents are approaching retirement. Not only that, but 1/3 of respondents will be eligible for retirement starting in 10 years. So this will be important to note as the agency discusses succession planning. In 2022, 6% of our climate survey sample self-identified as having a disability according to the ADA. That percent actually did not change from 2022 to 2024. However, we did see that the percent of noted veterans decreased slightly from the previous survey iteration. We also see that while not a vast majority, a notable percentage of employees reported their OPWDD tenure to be between 1 and 3 years. Additionally, we see that question items that asked about new job training and new job orientations found that less than half of respondents found those orientations and trainings to be effective. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to my colleague, Abby, to finish this out.
Thanks so much, Alex. So we definitely wanted to also consider the fact that in terms of employee resource group opportunities, roughly 1/3 of respondents in the survey expressed some interest in having those ERG opportunities. And we noticed also that for those who did express interest in those particular opportunities, we also wanted to know about if people wanted to have additional training topics as well. And the top 3 that were noted were emotional intelligence, microaggressions, and stereotyping. And the way we structured the question, employees did have an opportunity to check off more than one, so check all that apply. And we also had roughly 1,800 responses that were specifically looking at those types of training topics. So we certainly will be sharing this with the leadership that are not only present on the call, but also at the commissioner's level, because we're definitely excited to see how the results of this survey can translate into both the ERG context and also those additional training topics that are offered through our amazing training and talent development team. There were about 800 plus respondents who shared discomfort reporting incidents here at the agency, notably due to those retaliatory concerns. So as I was talking about some of those qualitative breakdowns in terms of open-ended text that people provided, it definitely gave us insights into sort of specific incidents that may have occurred and the types of reprisal of fear and also bullying and also incidents of feeling like people were being targeted. So we certainly were definitely appreciative for those of you who shared your story. And please be aware that those responses that you gave are indeed confidential. Also, the majority of employees indicated an increase in job responsibilities over this past year. So if we think about the context of the past year, the survey was disseminated in April of 2024 and May of 2024. So we were asking this question within a time horizon of roughly, let's say, spring of 2023 to spring of 2024. So by that point, while we definitely still have COVID-19 as a global public health concern, the first and second waves of the COVID-19 pandemic had ended by that point. So we're still seeing employees having a notable increase in job responsibilities after the initial spike in staffing due to the pandemic initially. And then finally, getting at one of the comments that was in the chat coincidentally earlier about this idea of life goals and motivation. So while most employees enjoy their work, financial security was not noticed as highly as a reason for working here at the agency. So that definitely speaks to employees having a more intrinsic and a more deep reason for sort of being here, doing their work, and thinking about a bigger rationale for supporting the people that we serve. And that's very important when we think about what sort of, helps to motivate us throughout the workday and what motivates us to work seamlessly with our colleagues, is that it's something beyond just financial security itself. And so now we definitely would like to transition back over to our Chief Diversity Officer, Dr. Hira Mir.
All right, hello again, everyone. I've been very engaged with the presentation on the screen, but also in the chat. So thank you so much for being incredibly engaged. Speaking of engagement, we wanted to highlight some other popular activities and approaches that have been quite successful this past year, or the last 2 years, and just kind of wrapping it all up for what you can continue to expect moving forward, things that you might already be involved in, and perhaps you don't know that all of this work is connected to our internal diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. So we are soon to be releasing our diversity calendar for 2025. This actually turns out is a very popular resource. We've received lots of comments and encouragement about our annual diversity calendar that I believe we've been doing since 2022, or even before, even before I was hired into this role. So soon to come, we've seen employees print it out, put it on their desk, kind of create events and employee events, team events based on the diversity calendar, honor celebrations that their coworkers are involved in. So lots and lots of positive remarks and comments about that one resource. We are in the middle of professional development modules. So we have a series of 8 modules that up to 900 of our employees have signed up for. In the last few months, these modules are hosted by Georgetown University's National Center for Cultural Competence. The modules feature a panel of family members, people with disabilities, and our very own OPWDD staff. They've been really, really wonderful to just really understand the many ways in which our work touches the lives of our staff, our families, and the people with developmental disabilities who are dependent on our services. So we have staff who are mandated to go to these trainings, and then when those seats are filled up, we do send an invitation to others. With supervisory approval, we can actually accommodate up to 1,000 people per module. And the modules are also recorded and available to watch, for a very long time, for years and years and years. So please contact us about that if you're interested. Language access is a huge operation and function at our agency that the DEI office oversees. We recently released new instructions and updates to all of our employees. We contracted with a lot more language access vendors. We have coverage all over the state. We now have 24/7 available to you 365 days a year, 24/7 video remote interpretation, which is really, really important for folks working in state operations, working in group homes where people have needs for communication 24/7, American Sign Language, other needs as well. And now this resource is available to you through our language access team. So instructions are there. Please reach out. We're doing trainings and things like that. So a lot to come. Really, really proud of that work. Community engagement, hopefully we'll have more to share with you, but in various pockets of our agency throughout the state, we have engagement with employers to find employment and to encourage employment. We have Indigenous communities reaching out to our field offices to say that we want OPWDD in our family nights. We want First Nations to be more seen by the OPWDD system, and often divisions will reach out to the DEI office for partnership to think through things. And, we're not perfect. We don't know all the answers in the DEI team, but we are very much committed to learning as much as we can about the various, diverse communities that we have all across the state. People of all different languages, cultures, geographic needs, educational backgrounds. And so our DEI office is definitely a resource there. So these are just four of some of the activities and some of the communication that you might already have in your inbox, and just more to come. But of course, feel free to reach out to us. You know who we are. We have an inbox. So we're available. And I believe I'm turning it back over to the data team for some other resources.
Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. It's now time for Q&A. We want to hear your voices. Please feel free to mute yourselves. If you have a question, then we can try to respond to the questions. Kemenek, do we have any questions in the chat?
I'm looking now. Here's one. I'm interested in knowing the amount of individuals that OPWDD has. Are people with developmental disabilities in addition to the ADA? That's from Michael Orzel.
Right. So yeah,
Go
so we
ahead,
actually
Mira.
do our DEI office actually does track the number of people with disabilities on an annual basis, the number of people who are veterans on an annual basis, to share with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion Management as part of civil service. And so we are currently in the process of doing that. And I definitely think that we can share those numbers. I'm not entirely sure if we have kind of shareable dashboards at this point. But as Abby just posted in the chat, a lot of that data is already is available to all of you. And so that is definitely a goal as part of our diversity, equity, inclusion strategic plan. It's a mandate of our agency to increase the number of people with disabilities and the number of veterans who are employed. And so we are taking a look in tracking that. And just kind of as a context, we are a new team still. So we're building the capacity to do all of this. But I think that's a great question. And please continue to keep us in check to navigate those numbers. I don't know if the data team wants to add some more information there from your perspective, but more to come. We are looking at those numbers, and it's definitely something that we're trying to build is transparency and looking at trends over time, Mike. When can we expect the diversity calendar? I was hoping before the end of the year, so hoping to announce it. It's actually completed, and I just have to finalize. We get some really cool graphics from our communications team. Our DEI team really wants to make it pretty and beautiful. So it's actually completed. It's with me, and I'm hoping to finalize it and send it out in time for the new year. So thank you for asking about that. There were some questions earlier. I know that there was a lot. Our team does prepare an FAQ, a frequently asked questions document, or where we can communicate with all of you and post it online. So we do plan to answer every single question, but I did want to try my best to generally answer your questions. I believe we only have like 2 minutes left. There was a lot in the chat about updating the survey, maybe digging a little bit deeper into what employees are feeling around diversity, equity, inclusion. I think that's a great idea. Honestly, we didn't know how much engagement we would get. And so we are just really, really excited that more than 4,000 people took the survey, and that so many of you are engaged on this webinar. So again, we weren't really sure what the interest was, but now that we know, we can definitely dig deeper with the survey and even make our Lunch and Learn a little bit more interactive. There were some suggestions about using polling, maybe even making the chat a little bit more anonymous. I think that might be really cool to make it more of an interactive webinar, but we didn't want people to feel like you couldn't talk to us. It does seem like we do need to do a little bit more communication around the anonymity of the survey and how results are going to be used. And again, we weren't really even sure who was paying attention, who was taking the survey, who was being engaged. But I think you all have given us a lot of really specific things that we can build into the survey cycle. I think it will all really help with the engagement. So I think it's that level of feedback and encouragement that we need so that we can truly understand how folks are kind of seeing the survey, how they're responding. So one really important thing, and I know folks have to sign off, but worthwhile to take a look at the technical reports. It is a challenge to present this information, so much information in a way that's understandable. And we wanted to present kind of technical information in an understandable way, but it's important to remember that just because it says, 54% agreed, that doesn't mean that the other part disagreed. For the most part, folks agreed, and then the second largest percentage were neutral. So there actually wasn't a lot of disagreement with some of the more positive statements. There has been a serious improvement over time, which shows that we're all doing the work. We're all trying to create a better workplace, but worth looking at the technical report. So just because there's an agree on the screen doesn't mean that the other part of it is disagree. In fact, the second largest group or percentages were people who neither agree nor disagree, so remained neutral. So I don't want us to think that there's a negative association with it. We're trying to be transparent. Where something did seem like there needed to be a lot of improvement, we tried to put that out there, but for the most part, there has been vast improvement. And I do think that there's a huge, important cultural shift happening. So I wanted to mention that because there were a lot of comments. But of course, it's very clear that you're all very engaged and there's a lot more that we can do around this. But this was a great time, a great Friday to spend with you. And I don't know, I think we're good. But if the RDA team has any, the research team has any final remarks, it's your call.
Thank you all, and we are glad that you wanted to join us during your lunch hour. Have a good rest of your day.
Alrighty, bye everybody.